Proverbs chapter 24. Proverbs chapter 24, just 3 verses, verse 10, 11 and 12. Proverbs 24, and reading from verse 10. If you falter in times of trouble, how small is your strength? Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay each person according to what he has done? Very, very challenging words this morning as we consider the sanctity of life. Just by way of advert and introduction, we are looking and we're working through the book of Proverbs in the evening, in our evening services. As I've said, it's a bit of a voyage of discovery for me, in that I'm seeking to work through the book of Proverbs progressively rather than thematically. Many preachers approach it thematically, and that's the natural tendency, but I'm felt that there must certainly be a reason that God has for giving us the Proverbs in the order they're given, and I'm hoping to discover that along with you as we go through the book of Proverbs. Up to now, we've been in chapters 1 to 9, which are really a systematic, progressive introduction to the book, and so it's been easy. As we've looked at that, the challenge starts now as we move into chapter 10 and the following chapters. But let me simply say this. So if you want to find out how to live the good life, because that's what our theme is as we go through the book of Proverbs, how to live the good life. If you want to find that out, come along on a Sunday evening as we work through the book of Proverbs. But let me simply say this, that we've found out in these first 9 chapters, as it's been introduced to us, the book of Proverbs, we found out that the good life can really be summarized in this way. It means living God's way in God's world, as opposed to living in an ungodly way or a godless way in God's world. That's the definition of what is foolish and what is wicked in the book of Proverbs. But always in the book of Proverbs you constantly have this contradiction, this contradistinction between the way of folly and the way of wisdom. The way of wisdom is always seen in living in God's world, God's way, which is explained to us as the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so as we come to the book of Proverbs and the rest of the chapters from chapter 10 onwards, having laid that foundation, let me give you a little sneak preview of what we're going to be doing tonight. The book of Proverbs, I believe, is this. It's like a mathematical formula, a geometric formula. When you are faced with this problem, you apply this formula. When you're faced with that problem, you apply this formula. When you're faced with that problem, you apply the formula and you solve the problems in that way. Now, what is the formula of the book of Proverbs? The formula is simply this. Foundational to all of life is this living God's way in God's will. Fear the Lord. That's the foundation. And we are told, so we're given a foundational principle. We are secondly in Proverbs given an observational principle. Proverbs is full of observations. This is the way the world works. If you work hard, generally you will prosper. If you're lazy, generally you will get to poverty. Observation. But then there's a third principle at work in the book of Proverbs, and that is obligation. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. There you have obligation and observation together in one verse. Now, the way you train up a child, this is observation. If you train up a child in a certain way, that's the way the child will generally go. That's the observation. So what is your obligation? Train him up in the way that he should go. Do you see? And that's the way the book of Proverbs works of how to live the godly life. Well, using that formula then, and the book of Proverbs, another little sneak preview. Why am I going through it the way I'm going through it? Because I believe that the book of Proverbs is written to us in the way life happens to us. You see, you don't live your life in compartments. You go to study any course at university or colleges and that sort of thing. They don't just teach you one subject this year, another subject the next year, and another subject the next year. When I was studying theology, I learnt systematic theology. But alongside systematic theology, I was learning church history. And I could see how the problems that the church faced in church history were addressed by the theology. I learnt alongside that New Testament introductions and New Testament theologies and those sort of things. And you put all the pieces together and they fit like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And that's the way the book of Proverbs does it. And so as we face the various problems of life, as we're going down the road of life, how do we apply these principles? Well, I'm jumping now this morning to chapter 24 and verses 10 to 12 because I believe they face us with what are our obligations based on the observation of the trouble the world is in ignoring the sanctity of life. So what do we learn about living God's way in God's world? What do we learn about living the wise life, the good life, in respect of the sanctity of life from these verses in Proverbs this morning? The first thing we learn is that we have obligations. And I want to say to you there are four obligations that I want to bring out this morning. The first thing that we learn is that we are obligated to be strong. To be strong. Verse 10, if you falter in times of trouble, how small is your strength? We live in times of trouble, and what do we got to do? Firstly and foremostly, we've got to stand. We've got to stand firm. Like the old hymn writer says, stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. We cannot just sit back and say we can't do anything. Edmund Burke said, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. When we are in times of trouble, in evil times, we as good people, godly people, are called to stand. We are called to stand firm. We are called to persevere. We are called to be brave. We are called to be courageous. We are called to be strong in times of trouble. Now let me say to you, friends, whenever innocent lives are being taken, let me even make it more fundamental than that. Whenever human life is being devalued, in whatever way it's being devalued, that is troubled times. Whether it's through slavery, where maybe the lives are not being taken, but the lives are being devalued, or whether it's through a policy such as apartheid or any other kind of prejudicial policy, or whether it is through the slaughter and the killing of innocent people, life is being devalued and it's troubled times. It was troubled times in the Old Testament times when certain pagan religions were sacrificing their children. Nobody would deny that that was troubled times. Nobody would deny that during the Greco-Roman empires, when they used to have children that they didn't want and they just used to abandon them, they just used to leave them out in the streets or maybe even go and throw them on the rubbish heap. Nobody would deny that those were troubled times. Not much has changed. Not too long ago, in a dumpster very, very close to here, a newborn baby was found. Now, if that's not trouble, if you don't acknowledge that as trouble, friends, then I don't know what you will acknowledge as trouble. When a human life is regarded as of such little value that it can be abandoned or can just be taken and sacrificed and killed, then it's troubled times. When 850,000 Tutsis are murdered by Hutus in Rwanda, that's troubled times. When the world turns a blind eye to that, that's troubled times. When 6 million Jews are taken to the gas chambers, that's troubled times. And let me say to you, we talk about the 6 million Jews. They will say that there was probably closer to 11 million people that were killed during the Second World War, because not only Jews, but gypsies and Jehovah's Witnesses and homosexuals were also subject to that kind of genocide. Now, we might not like some of those people, but that doesn't matter. Their life is still valuable. And who are we to to say that a life that is created in the image of God is of no value. It's troubled times when life can be devalued in that way. When human beings are denied basic human rights. When human beings are denied basic human judgment. Now, I don't particularly like the word human rights. I prefer to speak about human privileges because everything comes to us as a privilege from God. But we all understand what I mean when I speak about rights. I think sometimes we've taken rights too far. But we all have privileges which we can call rights that are given to us by God. And let me say to you, we in South Africa today are living in troubled times. When you look at the crime round about us, the violent nature of that crime, the fact that lives can just be taken. We're busy looking at a very famous murder case that's in the news right now about whether the man organized the murder of his wife, his new wife, or whether it was a senseless, violent crime in South Africa. It doesn't matter which it is. The fact that you can pay 16,000 rand to have your wife bumped off, that's devalued. If you think a human life is only worth 16,000 rand, friends, then I don't know. Our country recognizes that it's troubled times. The abuse of women and children. The devaluing of the value of a woman and a child in our society is trouble. So we recently had 16 days of activism against women and child abuse. It was really saying, here are the vulnerable, here are the defenseless of our society being abused, and they're being denied basic securities, they're being denied basic protection, they're being denied basic human rights. It's troubled times, and so there's a call for action. 16 days of activism against women and child abuse. Well, the Bible calls us to activism. The Bible says, if you falter in times of trouble, how small is your faith? We'll go and have a look, is your strength. We'll go on to see what kind of activism the Bible calls for in just a moment, what the Proverbs call for in just a moment. Because you see, friends, let me say this to you. The most wicked abuse, the most fundamental abuse, the most horrendous abuse of children and women, is the abuse of abortion. Friends, those who need protecting and the most defenseless in our society are the babies who are being aborted and the women who are being driven to abort. They are vulnerable. They are defenseless. And let me say to you, if we want to stand up and deal with the abuse against women and child abuse, let's begin right where it starts, right there before the birth. So how are we to be strong? How are we to be active? What are we called for? Second point. We're called to be strong, but secondly, we are called to intervene. We are called to intervene on behalf of the defenseless. He says in verse 11, rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. The implication that comes through these words that they are being led to death, that they are staggering, they are faltering, they are shaking towards the slaughter, is that they are people who are defenseless and powerless, probably innocent. Although it doesn't say here, but more than likely innocent. But friends, let me say to you, it doesn't matter whether they're innocent or not. You know, somebody said to me when there was the 9/11, when the planes flew into the World Trade the towers. Somebody said to me, oh, Pastor, all those innocent people. I said, no, there was nobody innocent. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. As we saw last week, Jacob and Esau are sinning in the womb. Before they're born, they're sinning. So nobody is truly innocent. But the point is, many people are being led to slaughter and committed to death for things that are unjust. And that's what the implication is here. Is here are defenseless, powerless people that have been denied justice. They are victims. That's what we're saying. They are victims. They are vulnerable. they are the ones who have no choice. I hate this business where you have these two groups, the pro-life group, and I'm all for them, but what I hate is the opposite, the opposing group. They call themselves pro-choice. Garbage. They're not pro-choice. What choice does that child have in that womb? That's the biggest lie you could ever wish to hear. What choice do they have? And let me tell you this, 83% of women who have abortions are having those abortions because they feel they've got no other option. They've been denied choices. That's the reason they're going for it. Let me read a quote. The majority of aborting women disapprove of abortion, but they resorted to abortion because they felt forced to. Sometimes circumstances were such that there just did not seem to be a better alternative. Dr. David Reardon states that 83% of women that he surveyed who had had abortions said that they definitely would not have chosen abortion if they had been encouraged differently by the people who played a role in the abortion decision. It goes against the very nature of a woman to abort her child. Abortion, friends, let me tell you, when they passed the termination of pregnancy bill in South Africa, they said it's a great victory for women's rights and women's issues. Rubbish! Let me say to you, abortion is below the dignity of any woman. I don't know of a woman who would naturally stoop to that indignity. You're robbing her of her dignity to allow her to go and have abortion. You're robbing her of her dignity to force her to go and have an abortion. Let me put it to you this way. Abortion is the killing of those without any choice in the womb of those who feel they have no other choice. Pro-choice is the biggest misnomer that you can come across in this world. And here these people are. They are weak, they are powerless, they are defenseless in and of themselves. And I'm speaking about the women as well. Most of them, 83% of them, according to David Reardon, are personally defenseless. I put it to you this way. Abortion is the exploitation of the powerless in our society. It's the denial of the basic human rights and dignity to those who are powerless, defenseless, vulnerable in our society. The child is a victim. Nobody can deny that. That child is a victim. Has no say in the matter, has no power in the matter whatsoever. But friends, perhaps in the past, the pro-life lobby has maybe been guilty of so loving the unborn child that they have been cruel towards the pregnant mother and the families and so on. And the so-called pro-choice lobby have been saying, no, you love the unborn child to the detriment of the rest of the family and society and so on. They're no longer saying that, because now the pro-life lobby is saying this. We've got to take a holistic approach, because not only is that baby a victim, but based on these kind of statistics, so is the woman. So is her family. They are the victims. A subjugated woman, and many, many women who are going to abortion clinics are women who have been driven there because the culture has so disempowered them that they don't have the right and the ability and the power to say no. They don't have the right to stand up physically against the so-called stronger male. Many of them are there as the victims of rape. Many of them are there as the victims of a culture and of a society that is warped, that is sick, that is ungodly. And friends, if I am standing on cultural toes this morning, I couldn't care. If your culture says this is a good life and it's an ungodly life, I want to tell you your culture is wrong. No matter what culture you've come out of, it's wrong. The only good culture is the culture that says, I'm going to live God's way in God's world. Some women are forced to it because they are forced into it by their economic circumstances. They cannot even feed and clothe themselves, let alone the children they've already got. And now they've got another one coming on the way. And where's the man in this? Oh, he's off. He's gone. But friends, abortion is not just a woman's issue, it's a man's issue as well. It's a man's issue very, very much. It's a societal issue as well. It's a cultural issue. It's an economic issue. So what are we called to do? We are called to intervene on behalf of the defenseless. We're called to rescue them. We are called to hold back those who are being led to this slaughter and to this death. We are called to protect those who are the victims. Well, how are we called to protect them? We're called to be strong. We're called to protect. How are we called to protect? Verse 12. We are challenged to face the facts. That's what we are challenged to do. Notice this. I love this verse. He says, if you say, but we know nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay each person according to what he has done? You see, friends, what we are told here in Proverbs is don't come and plead ignorance. There are many people who do that. They say, oh, well, I don't know about abortion. It's too much of a technical problem for me to try and work out. Is this human life? Is it actually life? What is being killed there? I don't know. And there's all these debates. Don't come with that kind of ignorance. Don't come with the kind of ignorance that says, well, I don't know. Are there really abortions happening out there? Don't come with that. You need to be educated. You need to be informed. You need to make yourselves aware of those facts because we are answerable to God for that. That's what he says. Don't come and plead innocence. Don't come and plead ignorance because the God who sees all things, he sees what's in your mind. He knows what you know and he knows when you've actually been deliberately avoiding the knowledge that you should be attaining. We need to make ourselves aware of the facts. We need to make it our business to be knowledgeable about those facts. Let me just mention 6 facts that we need to be knowledgeable about in terms of this whole issue of abortion. The first fact that we need to be aware of is that it's a human life. That embryo, that fetus, whatever you want to call it, is a human being. It's a human being. Conceptually, it's a human being. It's being conceived by 2 human beings. You know, some of the medical people who are pro-abortion, they love to show you little pictures of an embryo and say, look, it looks just like a little fish. Well, friends, I've never yet seen a woman give birth to a fish. No ways. 2 human beings have conceived that child. That will be a human being that will come out. It's got human life. It's got human genes. It's got a human DNA in it. That's all it's going to produce. It's never going to produce a donkey. It's never going to produce a fish. That's going to come forth as a human baby. Developmentally, it's a human being. Oh, it might be that small, and it may, right at the beginning, look like a little fish. But I want to tell you, within a very few weeks' time, very identifiable that is a human being. Arms and legs and all sorts of things. We don't have the time to work through it, but friends, if you can see, Shirley and I went to the Itemba Hope Clinic a few weeks ago in Springs, and they've got a little box. They counsel women who come in wanting abortions. They counsel them. And they've got this little box that you open up. And in that box they've got these little models, life-size models of these little babies at the various stages in the womb. And you can see that that's a human being. The very fact that that child is not yet able to speak, is not yet able to feed itself, is not yet able to exist outside the womb, and all that, doesn't make it any less human. Just as the same thing as somebody who is lying on life support system in one of our hospitals right now is human, so is that baby that is totally dependent upon the mother's body for its life support a human being. It's nothing else, it's a human being. Yes, it's in a different stage of development. Hands up those of you who are not in a stage of development right now. Some of us are very advanced in our stage of development and we'd rather be closer to where that little unborn child is. But it's a human being in a state of development. Biblically, What does the Bible teach about babies within the womb? Psalm 139, everybody knows Psalm 139. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. When you knit me together in my mother's womb. Our thought for the week in the bulletin on the sanctity of life. Notice what Job said, verse 31 and 15. Chapter 31 and verse 15. Did not he who made me in the womb make him? He made me. Job is not saying he made some little globule of blood and cells. He made me. I'm a person. He made me in the womb. Did he not make them? Did not the same one form us both within our mothers? Actually, that's a lovely statement, that, because let me tell you, that statement makes unbiblical any devaluing of any human life, whether it's through slavery or any other way, whether it's through racism or whatever. The God who made me is the God who's made everybody else. And we are people. Biblically, we saw last week when we spoke about Jacob and Esau. What did we read in chapter 25 of Genesis and verse 22? The children within her womb were wrestling one with another. They're not spoken about as the fetuses or the embryos. They are the children that are wrestling together in the womb. What happened when Mary went to visit Elizabeth? John the Baptist leapt within her womb. And what did Elizabeth say? She said, the baby within me. She uses the word, the Greek word that can be used of a baby lying in a cot. An infant. The infant within me leapt. I'm just going to add another fact. Sorry, I said 6, but let me add another one just onto this. Secondly, we need to be aware of the fact that it is an individual human life. It's an individual human life. You see, those who are pro-abortion, they say it's the woman's choice to do with her body what she wants to do with her body. No, friends. That baby within her has its own unique DNA. It is a separate life in and of itself. Nobody can tell me that I cannot clip my toenails when I want to clip my toenails, because my toenails are part of my body. It's my body. I have the right to clip them when I want them. You don't have the right to destroy another person's life simply for the fact that they are resident within your body at that moment in time. It's a separate human life. Thirdly, it's a viable human life. There's a third fact. It's a viable human life. In other words, this life will come to termination. It will come to birth, given God's providence. God will bring that child to birth if God so determines. Don't let people, and you see many times people say, but it's all very easy to speak against abortion, but there's so many problems that are there. What about the poor woman who the child within her hasn't got any arms or legs? Well, let me tell you, go and watch the DVD Life Without Limbs. A chap who was born without arms or legs, and he goes around preaching in Australia. Life Without Limbs. Most wonderful to see how this man copes in life and how he's brought glory to God. I happened to be in the exclusive books at Bedford Gardens this past Friday, and there was a book by this chap, and he's written a book, and you know what he's called the book? Life Without Limits. Life Without Limits. You see, had that been left to the doctor's choice, they would have said, oh no, mother, rather abort this child, because his life is going to be worth nothing. Who's to say that if I don't have arms and legs, my life is worth nothing? We cannot make that value decision. It's a life, it's a human life, and it's a viable human life within that person. Recently, Yorkie Rick, the pastor of the East Side Baptist Church in Windhoek, they had a lady in their church, a family in their church. A woman felt pregnant. They noticed there were some problems, went down to a specialist in Cape Town, and he said this child, the diagnosis was that this child was born, was being developed, but with virtually no brain, an absence of a brain, an empty skull. And he said, there is no hope. It's an impossibility for this child to continue developing within the womb. But even if it does develop within the womb, it will not survive outside of the womb. Hours at the maximum. That's in the history and the medical history, hours is the maximum that this child will survive. We suggest that you abort. She went back to Yoki and she said, what should I do? And Yoki said, it's not your decision to make. If God wants to take this child's life, let God take that child's life and you can live with a clear conscience. Don't you take that life and then have to deal with your conscience afterwards. Let God take that life. And he said to her, let me tell you, and he said to the husband and the wife, he said to both of them, shame, I think that was a big bump. They said to this family, we as a church are not going to abandon you in this. We as a church will stand by you in this. There's hard days ahead. We don't know what it's going to be, but we are here with you. And we as a church will stand by you. And as a church, they have stood by that family. That child did develop in the womb. Not only developed in the womb, but survived the birth. Not only survived the birth, but survived, and I haven't heard, I meant to phone Yoki this past week, and I apologize for not having done so. But for months, that child has survived and developed normally. Normally. Who is to say, who's going to make that judgment call as to whether that child is viable or not? I looked up some things on the internet this past week. Go and Google it. Mari Switzer, Switzer, and Samuel Armas, Armas. Both of these were babies in their mother's wombs diagnosed with spina bifida. And so they decided that the best thing to do was to operate on these babies in the mother's womb. And there are the pictures. They had journalists standing by to take pictures. One of these photographers was a so-called pro-choice person. And what happened was in the process of doing the operation, they took the womb out, they opened the womb, and they had to partially take the baby out to start working. And what they pulled out was the arm of the baby. And you know what? They grabbed the doctor's finger. Just like a baby, that reflex of holding on to a finger. That happened in that operating theatre. The photographer who was taking it said at that moment, it's not abortion, it's murder. That's what it is. Changed like that. That brings me to the fourth fact that we need to then be aware of. It is murder. It is murder. To take the life of an infant within the womb is not, as they euphemistically call it, termination of pregnancy. Again, that's another one of these garbage statements, termination of pregnancy. Again, let me ask you a question. Who of you have ever seen a pregnancy that doesn't terminate? Pregnancies are designed to terminate. 9 months, that's it, they will terminate. They're going to end. What is the termination is the termination of a human life. It's the premature termination of a pregnancy by means of the termination of a human life, the murder of a human life. And if you want to argue with me on that it's not murder, let me simply say this. Have you ever heard of a woman who has miscarried saying, oh, I lost the fetus? She says, I've lost my baby. Because it's a human being. Do you know that in certain countries, certain states in the United States and certain countries around the world, if somebody attacks a pregnant woman and the child within her dies, that person will be charged with fetal homicide, the murder of the fetus, in plain man's language. You see, what they're saying is this: if the mother wants to keep the baby and you kill that baby, then you are guilty of murder. But if the mother doesn't want to kill the baby, if the mother doesn't want to keep the baby and you as an abortion doctor kill that baby, then you are free of guilt. In other words, what they're saying is this, is the mother's choice, the mother's will determines whether the thing is right or wrong. In fact, what they're saying is the mother's will determine whether this is a human life or whether it's just a globule of a piece of her body. Garbage, friends. That is a child. It is a it is an individual personality. And to kill that personality is nothing short of murder. It's the killing of a defenseless human being. Fifthly, it's fatal and it's painful. So it's a human life, it's an individual human life, it's a viable human life. To kill it is murder, but fifthly, it is fatal and it is painful. Could add to that, it's brutal. Abortion is fatal, painful and brutal. I went and tore one of these little slips off of one of these abortion adverts on the poles out here. Dr. Pinky. Can you imagine going to somebody by the name of Dr. Pinky, first of all? Advertising abortions, and here's what Dr. Pinky, he or she says. Safe and pain-free. Ask one of those little children that were in that womb. One day when we get to glory, ask that child that was killed in that womb if it was safe. Ask that child if it was pain-free. Nonsense. It's not safe and it's not pain-free. There have been studies that have shown the kind of trauma and the kind of pain that are involved in the taking. And it's too horrendous to even, I don't even like to think about it, of what that child goes through. And it ends up fatal. That child dies. It's not safe. And it's not pain-free. And let me say to you, not only is it not safe and pain-free for the baby, but neither is it safe or pain-free for the mother. It's not. When they counsel women, and many of these women go for counsel, they're supposed to be getting counseling before they have the abortion. But in the government clinics, they don't have the personnel, they don't have the training, they don't have the skills with which to counsel these women. You see, it would be all very well if you say to them, okay, you've come for an abortion, let me counsel you. Let me tell you what the alternatives are. Let me tell you what your options are. Let me tell you realistically what you'll go through in the abortion. Let me tell you realistically what you'll face after the abortion. Now make your decision based on that. Every decision is only as good as the amount of information on which you've got to base the decision. Most women are having abortions because they've got that amount of knowledge about what is going on. Because they don't tell them the kind of pain that they're going to go through. Oh, you will suffer some cramps. Some cramps. Apparently, it makes childbirth child's play. The cramps that will go through, depending on the type of abortion that is being gone through. It's a very painful procedure in most instances. But friends, that pain is nothing compared to the pain that goes on afterwards. What they call post-abortion syndrome. It's a psychologically defined condition. It's a treatable. It needs to be treated as a psychological condition. Women who have gone through abortions are 6 times more likely to commit suicide than any other woman. That's the statistic. It's not games that a woman goes through. In a previous church, we knew a lady who was advised to have an abortion because they said there was going to be developmental problems in terms of the child and viability of the life and so on and so forth. She had an abortion. She suffered the psychological scars of that for years and years and years afterwards. When I met her, she had had that abortion maybe 30 years earlier. She was suffering still. When you started to speak, when you started to scratch, you found that was the big thing in her psyche. She ended up suffering from Alzheimer's, ended up going to an early grave, and really and truly that was the trigger behind it. Friends, it's not a walk in the park for the woman. It's not safe and it's not pain-free. Sixthly, we need to be aware of the fact that many mothers don't have options to choose from. or they don't think they've got options to choose from. Many of them are alone. They've been abandoned. They're desperate. They've been abused. They're in an economic situation that they just don't know where to turn. It's desperate, and they think this is the only way out. And so, friends, let me just say this. Let me re-quote to you again. For every child who dies in an abortion, there is at least one other victim, the mother of that child. Many women find they have not only allowed the destruction of the lives of their children, but also damage to their own lives. Physical and emotional complications result from a decision that was often made out of fear and desperation. In this vulnerable state of mind, they are taken advantage of by $1 billion a year industry. Do you think that Dr. Pinky is going and printing pamphlets and putting them all over the streets because she's doing something from altruistic motives? He or she? They're making money out of this, friends. And so they're being taken advantage of by $1 billion a year industry that offers what seems to be, at the time, the only convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. What these women don't know is that this decision is often full of lifelong consequences, far worse than the immediate crisis of the pregnancy. Let's be aware of that, friends. The issue of abortion is not, in most cases, it's not the issue of a callous woman who has said, I just want to kill this child. No, friends. In most instances, it's the issue of a desperate woman who just feels there is no other hope for her whatsoever. And she's been driven to that absolute, desperate, and horrendous measure. And then seventhly, and I've already said this, but I'm just going to reiterate it, it's not just a woman's issue. It's not just a woman's issue. It's a male issue as well. There is never an abortion that has been performed yet. There's not one child that has been killed in an abortion where there hasn't been a man that's been involved. That I can tell you right now. It's a male issue as well. And men need to stand up and be men. And if the cultures that we are in are stopping men from being men, we need to, as biblical Christians, challenge those cultures. We need to challenge those societies. We need to challenge those worldviews. You're not being a man to force a woman to those desperate measures. And it's also, as I say, it's a social problem. It concerns every single one of us. So then, fourthly, friends, our passage tells us that we are compelled to do something. We are compelled to do something. Don't just sit there, do something. Rescue those that are being led away to death. Hold back those who are staggering towards the slaughter. Well, let me tell you right now, friends, we are compelled to do something because actually we're under God's judgment to do something. We're answerable to God to do something. If we say we did not know anything about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay each person according to what he has done? Or maybe what he or she has not done? We are answerable, friends, before God. We are compelled to do something. But what are we compelled to do? What should we do? What can we do? Some people say, we need to go and picket outside the abortion clinics. Is that what we should do? Some people say we should go and bomb the abortion clinics. Is that what we should do? Some people say we should go and shoot Dr. Pinky and her kind. Is that what we should do? And some people have done those kinds of things. Friends, I say to you, no, I don't think that's the way to go. And I know many very respected people who have gone and picketed outside these clinics. One very well-known person who shall remain nameless was charged with trespassing because he went onto the property of a abortion clinic and he was warning women as they were coming in. He was saying, don't do this. And they charged him with trespassing. They said, this is private property. You are trespassing. And he had to come before the law courts for trespassing. And he said, yes, I'm guilty here of trespassing, but there's another law, which is the law of necessity, that says I can break a law if it's necessary for a higher good to break this law. And they said, yeah, but hold on, what are you talking about? He said, well, if you've got a sign, no trespassing on your property, and I happen to be walking past and I see somebody busy beating you to death on your property, the law of necessity says that I can break the law of no trespassing to go and stop that person from killing you. And if you then charge me for trespassing afterwards, it'll be thrown out of court because the law of necessity overrode the law of no trespassing. And I said, yes, but this is a different thing altogether. He said, no, it's not. There are people being killed there. Now, you can take that route. And let me say to you, some people have done that. The people who started the Itemba Hope Clinic, that's what they started doing. They went to the abortion clinics, started to speak to the woman there, but they said, at the end of the day, they found that it was totally ineffectual. Because here were these women who had now made this decision that they were going to come for an abortion. They were already riddled with guilt. They were already desperate. They were already just, their lives had fallen apart. And all you were doing was heaping burning coals onto their heads. All you were doing was loading more guilt onto them. You weren't changing a single mind. And certainly you're not going to change Dr. Pinky's mind by standing there with your sign. Not at all. You're not going to win any friends. You're not going to influence the society. You're not going to change anything. You're not going to save one life by going and bombing abortion clinics and shooting Dr. Pinky. All you'll be guilty of is taking other lives. So how are we going to do it? I was just thinking on the way coming here this morning, chatting to Shirley and Sue, I'm quite sure that putting up these stickers all over these street poles and that sort of thing all around our city is a violation of bylaws. You're not allowed to just put up stickers all over where you like. Even when we have elections, the candidates in the election are given a time period within which they can erect their posters and by which they must take those posters down. Otherwise, they will be fined. So here's something that we can do, and I'm going to start trying it. I'm going to start phoning the authorities and saying, I've got a name and address and a telephone number of somebody who's going and putting stickers up all over on public property, defacing it and all that sort of thing. Will you take it further? Maybe I can get Dr. Pinky to stop putting up his or her signs in that way. But I think there's a far better way that we can get involved. And that is, friends, to assist the pregnancy crisis centres. Those centres, those groups, and there are many of them at work, that are positively helping women who are seeking abortions. The Itemba clinic that is in Springs, and I'll say something about that in a moment. What they do is this. People come to them thinking they provide abortions. They say, no, we don't provide abortions, but before you have an abortion, would you like us to just chat to you? Would you like us to do you an ultrasound? We'll give you a free ultrasound scan, and let's chat and then see it. When the women see that child within them on the scan, most of them say, I'm not going to have an abortion, because they realize it's a life. But they then say, but I'm desperate, I don't know what to do. They say, well, we'll walk this road with you. They've got cupboards, rooms full of clothes for the mothers, full of children's clothes so they can clothe the children. They collect food and they distribute food to these women who are coming, who don't have anything else. So they take care of the mother, they look at taking care of the rest of the family, and they look at taking care of the baby. They've got baby clothes. They're wonderful ideas. They've got baby clothes there from 0 to 3 months and so on and so forth. And the whole idea is this. You come along, they'll give you a pack of clothes, and off the mother goes with those clothes. After 3 months, she brings those clothes back, and she gets clothes for 3 to 6 months. And after 6 months, she comes back and she changes those. And there's this constant rotating of clothes, so that people have another choice. They've helped so many, and I haven't got all the statistics, they've helped so many, and they've saved so many lives already. That, friends, is a positive thing that we can do to take care of that kind of situation, to educate the men, to educate the women, to provide options so that the woman can truly make a choice, so that the family can make a choice, so that the society can make a choice. Now, Shirley's got some pamphlets from Itemba So afterwards, if you'd like to get some from her, you can speak to her. Let me just say that if you are interested in getting involved, and we can provide things like clothing and fooding and all that sort of thing. If you're wanting food, we can provide those things. If you want to get involved, you want to help in that way whatsoever, speak to Shirley. Let's have one person that liaises with them. Otherwise, you've got 10 people that are doing the same thing, and we're just duplicating what's going on. To save Itemba time and effort, work through Shirley. She will be the liaison person, and let's help in that way. Get involved in those sort of ways, friends. Abortion is the murdering of innocent babies. It's a symptom of troubled times, troubled people, troubled societies. And if you falter in times of trouble, how small is your strength? Let's not ignore it. Let's stand up. Let's stand up against that abomination so that we can live God's way in God's world. Now, I know that as I've been speaking, I may be speaking to someone here this morning who may have been considering abortion. Maybe I'm speaking to somebody like that lady that was in the previous church who had already had an abortion. Maybe I'm speaking to somebody here who is counseling somebody to perhaps go and have an abortion. And perhaps all I've done this morning is make you feel guilty. Friends, let me say to you, we are all guilty before God. We are all sinners before God. The good news is there is a hope. There is hope in Christ. People need to turn to Christ. People need to find the forgiveness for their sins in Christ. People need to find the hope for life in Christ. That man who's lived life without limbs has found fulfillment in his life through Christ. And so if you've committed if you've been sinful in this area of abortion, let me say to you, confess that sin before him, because he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin. Some of the greatest saints in the Word of God were murderers. Moses as a notable example. In Christ alone, my hope is found. Friends, let us as a congregation turn to Christ, and under the wisdom of Christ, let us stand up for the rights of those who cannot speak for themselves, for the sanctity of life. Wherever we see life being devalued, in whatever way we see it being devalued, whether it's through racism or abortion or anything else, let us be a people who stand up for God. We're going to sing number 50 in the chorus book.